SNESdrunk.
Hello, the past few months I've talked about all the pertinent Super Nintendo releases from publisher and developer Koei. Why? Well, someone had to. In the process, I've gotten two types of requests. The most important one being, hey, how about a list ranking these games? The other request I've been getting not as frequently is, would you please, for the love of God, stop talking about these boring Koei games? Well, we can forget about those people because this list is the conclusion of my Koei journey, and it's just one more video for those people to skip, so who cares? So, why make a list video of just games made by Koei? Because they're all kinda sorta similar, and they all have a pretty steep learning curve. Really, Koei is just its own genre, at least when it comes to the Super Nintendo games they released. So, this list is to function as a basic roundup of the best Koei games, and I'm only doing 7 because I don't need to rehash the bad or mediocre games. But there is one game I want to point out that just missed the cut, Rise of the Phoenix. I think that's a solid gateway game to get into what Koei does best. The learning curve isn't too ridiculous compared to the other games you'll hear about later. Like for example, in this game, city management is almost entirely automated, but the game still offers just enough options and functionality that help you get to know what these games are all about without overwhelming you. But for the 7th spot on the list, I gotta go with
7.
Pacific Theater of Operations 2. Now, this is a game that will overwhelm you. You start the game, you pick a side, you pick a scenario, and then it's just a simple matter of managing fuel, materials, artillery, along with like 24 other resources, as well as managing an endless number of officers that each have their own skill sets when it comes to sea, land, and air tactics, and each officer has an endless number of ships and aircraft that each have their own sets of stats, and if you're not happy with the ships in the game, you can actually design and customize your own. You sit through meetings to determine how your budget will be allocated. You play a card game as a way of negotiating with other countries. PTO2 is the most Koei game on the Super Nintendo. It's so incredibly dense and detailed, with so many stats and options that I can't help but admire the sheer amount of work it must have taken to put together.
6.
Liberty or Death. This game is not nearly as dense as PTO2, but it still offers a good amount of functionality you can play with. Now, to be upfront, what I like about this game personally is that I already know a decent amount about the Revolutionary War since I'm American, so I found it kinda neat to set up and play through some of the more famous battles I'd heard about in school, which is advantageous since I'm familiar with how some of those battles ended. What I found especially interesting is that the game kinda sorta gives you a bit of insight into how the British perceived the war, since you can play as them if you'd like. From a gameplay standpoint, there's not a whole lot here that's different from other Koei games on this list, but it's not overly complicated, and you might find that it benefits from a more familiar subject matter like I did.
5.
Gemfire. Not every Koei game takes its cues from history, some make up history entirely, like Gemfire. This is a fantasy-based setting, so instead of battleships, warplanes, and muskets, we have knights, monsters, and wizards. Gemfire is the name of the powerful crown that contains 7 gems that grant its wearer all sorts of scary magic and power and stuff, to the point that the last guy to wear it had it taken from him by his daughter, who managed to pry out 6 of the gems and have them scattered across the land of Ishmeria. So you gotta plan, prepare, negotiate, and fight, Koei style, to collect the 6 gems and challenge the holder of the crown. I like this game. The original story is a welcome change, and I would have liked to have seen more strategy games like this on the Super Nintendo.
4.
Aerobiz Supersonic, moving from historic simulation to fantasy to airport management? Yeah, it's a bit of a detour, but believe it or not, the game is actually pretty good. Sure, the subject matter is just a wee bit on the dry side, since you're working with salesmen and lobbyists to get your airline successfully running in over 30 different cities all over the world, but it's a well-made and well-balanced game for the most part. Essentially, you're negotiating with airports and analyzing data to help you make decisions about what kind of planes to use, what the prices should be, or whether you should schedule more or fewer flights to a particular place. And you gotta do that while dealing with weather problems, natural disasters, and world events as they happen. It's surprisingly advanced and in-depth stuff for a Super Nintendo game, and I actually found it somewhat easy to get into. And of course, it helps that the soundtrack has some absolute jams. 3. Romance of the Three Kingdoms 4: Wall of Fire. If there's any game on this list that doesn't really feel like a typical Koei game, it's this one. Everything just looks and sounds so much nicer, and that goes a long way in making a historical sim strategy game more immersive. This one came out later in the Super Nintendo lifespan, being released in July 1995, so at this point the folks at Koei knew what they were doing, and it shows in this game. All the usual tactics you see in the romance games are represented well here, whether it's sending an officer to hide and spy in enemy territory, or bribing enemy officers, or spreading rumors, but that's all easier said than done. You have to make sure you don't overplay your hand or other territories will catch on to your act quickly. That's just good game design, and it's why it's number 3 on this list.
2.
Nobunaga's Ambition, Lord of Darkness. I'm ranking this one second because it's a combination of the most Koei-ness you can put into a game with it still being accessible and engaging. I mean, the game layout looks like it has its own Windows-style operating system. You gotta love that. There's only 2 scenarios to play through in this game, but rest assured you can still easily put at least 40 or 50 hours into this game. Developing regions in different ways leads to all sorts of results you'll encounter. For example, a good way to boost an officer's charm and intellect is to buy a painting, or to send them to a tea ceremony. But what you bring to the tea ceremony could be a matter of life and death, because if you bring that cheap, crappy Bigelow tea, you're just gonna insult your guests and embarrass yourself. All in all, it's a great time.
1.
The best Koei game on the Super Nintendo is Uncharted Waters: New Horizons, and it's because it works in the usual Koei strategy gameplay with mechanics you'd normally see in adventure and role-playing games. There's 6 long scenarios to choose from, all starring their own character, with the additional bonus of potentially running into one of the characters you don't choose. The formatting is clean, the graphics are nice, the pace of the gameplay is pretty good, and there's lots of ways to approach this game. You want to map the world and explore? Pick Ernst the Cartographer. Want to head a trading ship and make lots of money? Pick Ali the Merchant. Want to be a pirate and just fight everyone and steal everything? Pick Catalina. Or, well, you could pick any of the characters and do that if you wanted to. That's how open-ended this game is. I really think it's a top 20 Super Nintendo game. It's held up really well over time, and it's well worth playing today. Alright, that's all for now. If you want to know more about a particular game on this list, or maybe know more about something I didn't cover in this video, you can search the SNESdrunk channel or check out the Koei playlist I made. But in the meantime, I want to thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.